The post office froze when Marjorie Klein strutted in, pushing a Navy delivery cart like she was leading a parade. She announced with the self-assurance of royalty that all neighborhood mail must pass through her, then smacked a laminated badge on the counter that read, "Community Correspondence Director," rendered inexplicably in bright bubble letters. Behind the glass, Postmaster Dana Cho didn't even flinch. Without breaking eye contact, she pressed a button, and a heavy metal shutter slammed down over the service window with a final clang, the kind that made the air itself recoil. From the overhead speaker came a voice smooth and cold as polished steel. "Ma'am, step away from federal property." Marjorie lunged toward the outgoing mail bin as if it were a throne under siege. Dana, unfazed, reached for the phone and murmured, "Postal inspectors, please. I'm Martin Hale, data analyst, enthusiast of quiet neighborhoods, and owner of a modest ranch-style home in Maple Crest, complete with a fig tree that minds its own business better than most people on my street. My days used to run like formulas, neat, predictable, and unshared. That was before our HOA elected Marjorie Klein, a woman with hair styled like an armored helmet, pearls that could buy a used yacht, and a temperament composed entirely of citations and complaint forms. Not long after she took office, the envelopes began. Every day brought new absurdities in embossed stationery. Your trash receptacle was improperly oriented at 7:03 p.m. The hue of your porch light conveys emotional detachment. Then came her masterpiece of madness. She announced that all community correspondence must be routed through her for tone, verification, and content, moderation. We laughed, thinking it was satire. She didn't. Soon, laminated signs appeared zip-tied to the communal mailbox, warning, all neighborhood mail must be submitted to Marjorie for review and approval. Then at precisely 3 p.m. each day, she began patrolling the mail station, clipboard in hand, tapping it rhythmically like a conductor timing some unseen chaotic symphony. She even started marking packages with fluorescent stickers that read, "Return to sender, unauthorized delivery." When newcomers asked if she was serious, she told them with a straight face that first-class mail requires community authorization. Optional, she said, if the community frequencies weren't in harmony. Marjorie's latest innovation was a color-coded system. Yellow for pending vibe assessment, orange for potential neighborhood concern, and red for urgent return to sender for morale recalibration. I once watched her spend 45 minutes scrutinizing a Pottery Barn catalog, addressed to the Jennings, mumbling that their taste in dinnerware was lowering the emotional market value of Maple Crest. Her patrol setup evolved like a bizarre stage production. First came the folding chair, measured precisely 18 inches from the mailbox cluster. Then a card table appeared beside it, complete with a small cash box for the $2 courtesy handling fee. She charged anyone who dared retrieve their own packages. Nobody paid it. Soon, she arrived with a megaphone to declare mail delivery times as if conducting a civic ceremony. Then came the live streams. Marjorie Klein, neighborhood postal custodian, broadcasting to her massive audience of 7, 6 of whom were just collecting evidence for future complaints. The pièce de résistance was the doorbell camera she mounted on a pole beside the mailboxes. For security reasons, though everyone knew she was using it to spy on who was getting wine, subscriptions, or gourmet. Meal kits, she felt, were too aspirational for a modest zip code. One afternoon, my neighbor Caleb Ortiz spotted her crouched by the arrow-locked panel, palms pressed against the cold metal as if trying to divine its secrets. In her other hand, a lockpick set she claimed was authorized. Emergency access equipment. She muttered about federal gatekeeping and bureaucratic overreach as she fumbled with the latch. When Caleb confronted her, she straightened up with the poise of someone caught mid-ritual and announced she was performing a security audit for everyone's safety. The following morning, several residents, myself included, inexplicably stopped receiving HOA due statements and pool access updates. Meanwhile, a rumor began rippling through the neighborhood, sourced directly from Marjorie herself, that I was secretly running a side business from my mailbox on account of receiving 2 Amazon envelopes a week and, occasionally, and apparently, scandalously, a book. Marjorie soon launched what she proudly called a neighborhood postal watch, dedicated to spotting suspicious mail activity. The task force consisted solely of her and her equally eccentric ally, Doreen Mills, who spent their afternoons jotting down notes on everyone's delivery patterns like amateur data analysts with too much caffeine. Apparently, the very act of literacy had become a threat to suburban order. When Marjorie learned that I subscribed to 3 different magazines, she declared it a symptom of compulsive accumulation and dangerous intellectual overreach. But the real chaos began when she marched into the Maple Crest post office, clutching a bursting manila folder. Inside were dozens of forms she had filled out herself, 30 photocopies of Postal. Form 876, each listing Maple Crest homeowners. Association in the field meant for individual names. Attached on top was an HOA letter naming her as authorized representative for all residents, signed by something she called the Council of Excellence. A trio of identical signatures written in 3 ink colors. Standing at the counter, she announced that all correspondence containing community, references, or HOA acronyms must be withheld and rerouted to her for resident compliance verification. Postmaster Dana Cho examined the stack for about 4 seconds before lifting, her gaze with glacial composure. "And where," she asked, "are the signed authorizations from each resident?" Marjorie tapped her laminated badge like it held divine power. "Right here," she said. "This gives me all the authority I need." Dana didn't answer. She just turned toward the corner security camera, locked eyes with the lens, and pressed the same discreet button beneath the counter, the one everyone in Maple Crest now referred to as the Klein switch. Dana kept her gaze steady as she lifted the receiver and called the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, never breaking eye contact with Marjorie. Across town that same afternoon, I walked into the post office to check my P.O. box and nearly tripped over Marjorie's self-proclaimed victory cart, piled high with mail that clearly didn't belong to her. It looked like some bizarre treasure mound composed entirely of coupon booklets, junk mail, and pre-approved credit offers. By the next morning, 2 postal inspectors arrived, uniforms crisp, movements precise, accompanied by a local police officer whose main contribution seemed to be sarcastic commentary and moral support. They separated Marjorie from her, overloaded Dolly with the kind of calm patience you'd use to take craft glue from a 5-year-old who thinks it's a snack. Inspector Victor Redden quoted sections of Title 18, U.S. Code, 1701 through 1703, explaining in an even tone that obstruction, delay, or tampering with the mail were not just frowned upon but federal offenses. Meanwhile, Dana Cho was busy printing screenshots of Marjorie's forged authorization forms, highlighting every infraction in a shade of neon yellow that could guide airplanes. The inspectors reviewed footage showing Marjorie rummaging through envelopes, snapping selfies with tubs marked small parcels, pre-sort, and jiggling the outgoing mail slot as though it were a vending machine, withholding her favorite candy bar. When asked who had granted her permission to collect the community's mail, she replied with full conviction, "The neighborhood did." When pressed to specify which neighbors, she said simply, "Mine," as if that answered everything. The police officer turned away, coughing into his sleeve to muffle what was very clearly a laugh. Every envelope and catalog from Marjorie's Dolly was carefully logged as evidence. The counterfeit forms were sealed in those satisfyingly crinkly plastic bags you only ever see on crime shows. Marjorie was then invited to continue the conversation. In the back office, the one furnished, with chairs engineered to make people instantly reconsider their decisions, their careers, and occasionally their entire belief systems. The emergency HOA meeting that night was packed, standing room only, the air buzzing with anticipation like a live electrical wire. Neighbors who hadn't shown up in years arrived with folding chairs and steaming thermoses, ready to witness whatever spectacle was about to unfold. I came prepared, popcorn bowl in hand, and, because my brand of pettiness is always well organized, I also brought a printed copy of the official USPS notice declaring in bold letters that tampering with mail is a federal crime, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Alongside that, I had printed screenshots of Marjorie's own social media posts, where she had unwittingly documented her every infraction, complete with timestamps and geotags, a digital diary of self-incrimination that could have doubled as a training manual for investigators. When Inspector Victor Redden entered the room, the chatter dropped to a murmur. He had driven over personally to deliver the official statement from the Postal Inspection Service. He read it aloud to the packed audience, a 12-page cease and desist order, complete with enumerated subsections and annotated footnotes that sounded more like a legal thesis than a warning. There was also a referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office for Criminal Review, citing possible violations including mail theft, obstruction of correspondence, and conspiracy to interfere with postal operations. Redden's voice never rose, but his words landed like a hammer. Any future mail curation efforts would result in immediate federal charges carrying a minimum 6-month sentence. Then came the part that shifted the room from laughter to stunned silence. The human fallout. One neighbor's prescription medication had been delayed, leaving him without insulin for a week and sending him to the emergency room. Another resident's immigration documents had been stamped "vibes misaligned" and returned to sender, nearly causing them to miss a critical green card renewal deadline. A bureaucratic disaster narrowly avoided. And then there was Mrs. Donnelly, who never received the envelope containing photos of her newborn great-grandchild because Marjorie had deemed the contents not community relevant. She missed the announcement entirely, the moment she'd become a great-grandmother, lost to someone else's delusion of authority. Grandmother. Then came the story of a local business owner who lost a $20,000 contract when her mailed agreements were delayed beyond the deadline. A veteran stood up and explained that his VA benefits paperwork had been held up for weeks, leaving his disability payments suspended for 2 months. At that point, the Maple Crest insurance representative cleared her throat, the sound sharp enough to slice tension, and stated that the HOA's policy excluded any coverage tied to intentional criminal conduct by board members, which meant the entire association could be held financially liable for everything Marjorie had done. The remaining board members didn't hesitate. Before the microphone even cooled, they voted to remove her from office, 7-0, unanimous and merciless, in under 30 seconds. Next, the city attorney took the floor, reading from a folder thick with paperwork. The HOA was facing civil fines totaling $15,000 for interference with a federal mail service and damage to a shared mailbox cluster serving 47 homes. On top of that, an additional $5,000 penalty for each confirmed instance of mail theft, bringing the grand total to roughly $35,000 more. Then came the restraining order. Marjorie was forbidden from approaching any mail kiosk within 20 feet, a distance measured with literal precision, tape measure in hand, orange chalk outlining the perimeter like a low-budget crime scene. Her complexion cycled through every possible shade of red before settling into an alarming violet hue when the judge declared that she would complete 160 hours of community service, specifically at the post office. Under Postmaster, Dana chose direct supervision, sorting undeliverable mail and memorizing postal regulations. Marjorie let out a squeak that sounded like a rusted gate hinge begging for oil. Federal prosecutors opted not to pursue prison time, but made the terms unmistakably clear. Violate the restraining order, and she'd face immediate arrest and up to 5 years in federal custody. The $15,000 fine was due within 30 days. When Marjorie stammered that she couldn't possibly afford that, the city attorney smiled with immaculate composure and offered to set up a payment plan at 18% interest. To make matters worse, her real estate license, the badge of pride she'd flaunted at every HOA gathering, was suspended pending review by the state licensing board after they received notice of the federal complaint. She stood frozen, mouth opening and closing like a fish dragged onto dry land, while the full weight of her downfall collapsed. Around her, a house of vanity blown apart by its own storm.